Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, your RB Laws, and this is my co-host.
For Wells.
We appreciate all the support on our recent content. We are now moving on to the Western Conference for our offseason breakdown. So if your favorite team is in the East, we have for sure covered it. On our latest short on YouTube, at Ron Alderson 8 said, "Great video, guys. The Pacers haven't made a big offseason move since Paul George left. Both Halliburton and Siakam were midseason deals. Their GM said before that he likes continuity and doesn't want to make a trade just to make a trade." Correction, actually, it was on our regular episode, and we don't normally get comments on our regular episode, but shout out to this guy because I think this is one of the most wholesome and awesome comments that we've gotten regarding the actual content that we do put out. And I agree with him 100%. I think Indiana is setting themselves up, for extreme success, not just, for the upcoming season, but for, years down the line, because you've got a potential franchise guy in Tyrese Halliburton, but you also have a lot of movable contract pieces and you continuing to surround him with, star talent like Siakam. So what are your thoughts on that comment?
Yeah, I mean, I agreed. Again, like you said, it's a awesome comment and we appreciate it, because we always appreciate the kind words that we get from people, because it lets us know that we're, making a difference, right, in terms of, creating some quality NBA content, for people. But yeah, like that's the thing is that they haven't made a big offseason move since Paul George left, and like he mentioned, those were midseason deals. And they have a good system put in place where, again, it's a mainly young team. Obviously, they have some veterans, but, other than Siakam, a lot of their other guys are on the younger side. And so, yeah, like right now, the goal should be, let's see what we got. Let's see where we are. And, if we're way up there, right, where we're 2 levels above what we think we might be, okay, maybe that's where you make a big trade. But you don't necessarily have to, because, again, they're not quite on the same timeline as a team like Boston or Philly, where their goal is, or Milwaukee, where their goal is to win the championship next year. Their goal is to continue to improve, even though they made the Eastern Conference Finals, right? So they're further along than maybe a team like Orlando, but they're not necessarily at the Boston level, where it's like, okay, we're trying to win the title every year.
Yeah,
But,
for sure.
we'll see what Indiana continues to do. Like we mentioned, if you hadn't already done so, check out the previous episode for our thoughts on Indiana.
Yeah, so shout out to Ron Alderson 8. Great comment. And before we do get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yeah, so now we're moving on into the Western Conference. Very different from the Eastern Conference, right? Obviously in the East, you have some good teams, but I think there's, a very clear favorite in the Eastern Conference, to come out of the East and, possibly win the title as well, right? In the Western Conference, it's a little bit different because there's a lot more good teams, right? But there's not necessarily one team that as of right now completely stands above all, right? There's, we have, multiple teams where we feel like, all right, maybe there's like 3 or 4 teams in the tier of we could see this team coming out of the West and making the NBA Finals. And then you have another tier where it's like, okay, these are good teams, but they're probably not quite championship teams. Maybe they need another move or whatever, And then you have the teams that are kind of on the outside looking in, but they're still not bad, right? You only have, like in the Western Conference, a couple of teams that we know are going to be bad and want to be bad. But we're not focusing on those teams right now. Right now, we're going to be focusing on, since we did the Boston Celtics to kick off the East, we're going to start with the Dallas Mavericks to kick off the Western Conference, right? And for the Mavs, kind of what a season for them, right? Because obviously, the year before, they missed the playoffs, right? Because obviously, the Luka and Kyrie backcourt did not begin last season. It actually begun, at the trade deadline the year before, right? Where Dallas was okay, right? They had just lost Jalen Brunson, and they didn't really have a great offseason, but they were doing okay because, Luka's awesome. But then they made the push to acquire Kyrie, right? Brooklyn, they were winning games, but you knew that group was going to get split up. Harden had already left and been moved, and we knew in the offseason prior, right, that Durant was going to he had already requested a trade, so we knew he was going to move on, and that Kyrie was also going to move on. So Kyrie went to Dallas. They don't initially win a lot of games together, right? Because they can't defend, right? The offense is fine, but they can't guard a stop sign, right? And so they end up going from being in the playoff mix to then they end up kind of tanking the last bit of the season. They miss the playoffs, get the 10th pick of the draft, right? I think a pick or so later would have given the pick away, I think, to the Knicks. But they got the draft pick, the lottery pick, then they used it, and then they traded, I think, down in the draft to get Derek Lively, right? And, from Oklahoma City, right? And then they went into the season, started off pretty well, then kind of normalized and became kind of a middling team, play-in team. Then, of course, they had the great trade deadline, right, where they ended up acquiring Daniel Gafford and P.J. Washington, right, and then later on they put him in the starting five, and they made the NBA Finals, right? It was a great run. Obviously, it didn't end great because of them losing to the Celtics, so it didn't end in a title, but it was still a great season, right? So, and kind of unexpected, right? Because I remember going into last offseason for the Mavs, or coming out of last offseason, we were not super high on the Mavs. I know that we thought that they would make the playoffs and be better, but we didn't really look at them as a championship contender team. We even had conversations of, okay, is there a world where maybe they don't play that well and then they just break up Luka and Kyrie? And it was a good thing they didn't do that, right? Because they stuck to it, they added on to it, and made it better. The defense became much better, right, after the deadline and after they inserted Gafford and Washington into the starting five, because they were not initially starters. They were coming off the bench. They became the number one defense in the league for that stretch. And it got them. It catapulted them into the NBA Finals because you had Luka and Kyrie, these two great, sensational offensive talents that were kind of bolstered by a very good defense, right? Not guys that are considered all NBA level defenders, but guys that together, can play good defense, athleticism, length, size, rebounding. So you got all that. So then the question was, okay, how do they kind of improve on that, right? So they go into the offseason, and there were questions about, okay, are they going to keep Derrick Jones Jr., right? Are they going to move on from Tim Hardaway Jr., right? Lots of questions there, right? Would they possibly maybe acquire somebody like a Jeremy Grant or someone like that? But instead, they got out, and their big acquisition was Klay Thompson, right? Who they ended up giving a 3-year, $50 million deal to. So basically like 17-ish million a year. So obviously, this is a deal that I think a lot of people, are kind of intrigued by, right? I think there are, multiple sides to this. I think most people, I think obviously after last season recognize that Klay is not what he used to be, right? He's no longer a star player, right? He can still shoot, he can still contribute, right? But obviously, like, a deal like this is much more in line with what he should probably be making, right? Because he was making like $40 million last year. He was basically a max player because he got that max contract right after his ACL injury coming off that finals in 2019.
Mm-hmm.
So, you look at his numbers last season, right? And, they're not really that bad, right? Because obviously, it was his worst season, right, since his rookie year, right? So I'm not saying it was amazing, but he still gave you 18 a game, 3 rebounds, 2 assists, only 43 from the field, 39 from 3. But you kind of look at it, and I guess you kind of look at it from the perspective of, I mean, it wasn't a great year for him, but on a team like Dallas, right, where you're not going to be relying on him as much as he was kind of in Golden State, where it's like, he's kind of the second, I guess Kuminga at a certain point kind of became that. But for a while, like, Klay was kind of like the other go-to guy on offense, right? It was like Steph and Klay, the Splash Brothers, right? Now he's more like a tertiary guy, right? Like basically a third, fourth option, depending on the night or whatever, where, we talked about it, right? Where maybe he can transition into kind of more of a Ray Allen-esque role, right? Where he's not going to give you 20 plus a game anymore, but could he give you like 15, right? On like good, 3-point shooting, floor spacing, things like that. What I'm kind of curious to see is that, unlike Golden State, right, it's a very different style of play that Dallas has, because it's not a motion offense, right? It's a lot of ISO one-on-one. It's a lot of pick and roll. Which, again, that's a different look for Klay Thompson, which will probably be an adjustment, because it's not he's gonna be running through a million screens and catching off the ball, right? It's not like a ton of dribble handoffs and things like that. It's probably gonna be more so you're gonna stand in this area, while Luka and Kyrie do their thing, and then you'll get the ball in catch and shoot situations. So I think it's going to be an adjustment from that perspective. So I don't necessarily know if he'll start off hot out of the gates, right? Just because I think that's going to be, a change from him compared to what Golden State was typically doing, right? Obviously, he can shoot, right? So I'm not saying he's going to go from what he was doing to now he just can't hit a jumper anymore. But that's going to be a change, right? And obviously, he's even more reliant on his jump shot now than he was before because now he doesn't have the same level of quickness or athleticism. Now there's more, athletes that are kind of running around that can kind of, stymie him in a way that wouldn't have been the case before. Where
And
like he can move
defensively, he's
around.
not that guy anymore.
And that's the other factor too, defensively, right? Because obviously there's a difference between him and Derrick Jones Jr., right? It's kind of the classic thing of talent versus fit, right? Like talent-wise, he's a much more talented player than Derrick Jones Jr., right? Just because of the fact that he's got the resume, but even beyond that, right? Like he's a better player, right? He's a better shooter, better offensive player. Obviously the difference is Jones is a better defensive player for sure, right? We saw what he did defensively for the Mavs in the playoffs, right? Guarding guys like Paul George, guarding guys like SGA and Jalen Williams, guarding guys like Edwards. But he does have a ceiling, right? Ultimately, because obviously, like against the Celtics, right? That kind of stretched the limits of what he could probably do as a starter because they were leaving him open. Because even though he shot well from three over the course of the season, right, he's not known as a great outside shooter, and he just couldn't hit anything against the Celtics. And even defensively, right? Like he's kind of a skinny guy, not a guy that can use a lot of, that even though he's got some great athletic tools, right? He doesn't have like a strong frame or anything like that. I remember I saw the Mavs play the Wizards last year. And he spent a decent amount of time guarding Kyle Kuzma. And Kyle Kuzma kind of just bodied him because obviously, even though Kuzma is not like an elite level, like athlete or anything like that. He is, a decent athlete, but he's also just bigger, stronger, more physical. And that's the type of guy that can kind of overwhelm him, right? Like Clay will be better guarding like bigger, stronger guys, but he's probably going to struggle more with those quicker athletic guys. And that's kind of the question of with Dallas, okay, now you're probably going to sacrifice some defense because Clay's not as good of a defensive guy as he used to be. Obviously, going from Golden State to Dallas, right? Like with Dallas, you have probably better rim protection because you have Gafford and Lively, right? Even though Golden State had been like a pretty good defensive team, they weren't last year, up until I think that run that they made. But they did have guys like Wiggins and Draymond and Looney and other guys like that. But for Dallas, the defense mainly comes from the rim protection, right? I guess Washington can switch and guard guys as well. But that's going to be a change, right? So you kind of look at, all right, between Luka, Kyrie, and Clay, who's the guy that's going to guard the other team's opposing perimeter player? I don't know, right?
Clay.
Like that
It has to be Clay.
Yeah, like that might be a scenario where it might have to be like PJ Washington and then you pre-switch or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah.
But, that's going to be a little bit of a challenge, but I think you're kind of banking on guys like Lively and Gafford just being able to protect the rim. Like, okay, it's so if guys get past us, you're going to have to try to score on those guys at the rim. And those are, good shot blockers, rebounders. So, you also kind of look at it from the perspective of, for Lively, he's going to have to progress. We'll get to him in a second. But then they made a couple other moves, right? They also acquired Quentin Grimes in a trade. They got him from Detroit for Tim Hardaway Jr., right? Tim Hardaway Jr. That was a guy who had been a starter for Dallas for a while, right? Like it got to a point initially when they traded for Porzingis where some people started to call it the Tim Hardaway Jr. trade because for a while, right, Porzingis was kind of struggling, right? Because he couldn't stay on the floor mainly because of his health. And then by the end of his time in Dallas, he had the horrible series against the Clippers the second time around, right? Where, they went small and he couldn't punish them, right? And he became better at that in Washington. And, obviously, look at the difference he's making in Boston. But obviously, for Grimes, that was a young guy who played for the Knicks, had a good rookie year where he started, right? A decent number of games, right? He was kind of like your typical 3-and-D guard with some good athleticism that doesn't mind, hitting shooting a decent number of threes. So he's not going to start for Dallas, but he'll probably, be a rotational guy. He won't be the first guard off the bench because I think there are other guys that will have more seniority. But I think he'll have an opportunity to crack the rotation. And if he gets in, and does the 3-and-D, and does like, the 3-and-D things at a high level, that'll be a nice rotational piece for them. And then obviously they also got Najee Marshall, right? Who's the forward that they kind of gave the Derrick Jones Jr. contract to, kind of, right? So he's a different player from Derrick Jones Jr. because he's not quite as athletic, but he is more physical. And I think he's, I guess in kind of a better offensive player, right? Like if you now obviously like when you look at his shooting splits, it's kind of up and down, but last year he shot like 39% from 3. So, and he had like a bigger role for the Pelicans. So that's kind of what you want to see. If he can kind of bring that there where okay, he's shooting the ball well, even 46% from the field as well. So that's good. So he's a versatile guy. So if he can kind of, all right, we know he's not going to have the same level of athleticism as Jones, but if he can still give you decent defense but more physical, and then obviously he can also shoot well, then that combined with Klay Thompson, you can offset, losing Derrick Jones Jr. with that, right? Like those two together, right? That's solid. But after that, then like also in free agency, they grabbed Spencer Dinwiddie, right? Who played for the Nets and played for the Lakers. Didn't have a great season last year. Had some moments for the Lakers, but by and large, didn't have the best season. And then in the playoffs, didn't really do much at all. But it was also a different role, right? Because in LA under Darvin Ham, he was kind of used at times more like as a 3-and-D guy. He wasn't given a ton of on the ball opportunities. Also, they had a ton of guards and other ball handlers, anyways, right? Like D'Lo, Austin, LeBron. That's already 3 ball handlers. Whereas with Dallas, it's really just 2 guys that, I mean, obviously like guys like Exum can do some playmaking, but the main ball handlers are Luka and Kyrie. So, but off the bench, maybe when one of them's off the floor, right? Like say, like maybe he can, fill in as the backup guard because he did that for Dallas when he was there. And he played well for Dallas. So, and it's a minimum contract, so it's not that big of a deal if it doesn't pan out. After that, Markieff Morris, end of the bench guy, probably won't play a whole lot, right? That's a locker room veteran guy at this point. And, some muscle, right? So that way, like if somebody's messing with somebody, he can come off the bench. Dwight Powell's still there, for whatever reason, but, he's not obviously a big rotational guy anymore. It's more so if one of our bigs are hurt, he'll come in. Kleba, I'm curious because he had the shoulder issue in the playoffs, but even before that in the regular season, he missed a ton of time due to other injuries. And he's a guy that Dallas clearly seems to like because he's, a decently mobile big that can also space the floor and can kind of switch out on defense. It's just the issue is that like if he's at the 5, right, you're gonna have some issues, I think, rebounding wise and rim protection wise. But that's also why you have some of these other bigs, so that way you could play 2 bigs and he can be more mobile than a typical guy that he would kind of profile as. But after that, right, they drafted Maxence Prosper last year, didn't really do much because he didn't really get opportunities and he wasn't going to. So maybe he's another end of bench guy. Who knows? Jaden Hardy, right? He's still on the team. He's in the last year of his deal. He kind of played in the playoffs for Dallas at times because they needed another kind of offensive scoring guy off the bench. I'm curious to see what his role is this season, right? Because, there are some different guys. Even though they are running a big chunk of the roster back, there are some role players that have been moved out. But then after that, right, the only other young player that matters a decent amount would be Lively, right? Because obviously that was a guy that we liked in the draft, and he did, he had a really good rookie year where he was incredibly impactful on both ends of the floor, even more so than I think we would have expected, even though we liked him. Obviously defensively, he could protect the rim, he can get you some rebounds, run on the floor, playmaking wise, right? He's got some skills as a short roll guy where he can pass after setting the screen, right? So he can kind of, kick out to shooters and, kick out to other guys, which is a good skill to have as a center. If you can do that, right, you're going to earn minutes in a big way. So for him, can he add on to his strength? Maybe could he continue to expand on his offensive game? Could you experiment now maybe with some handoffs now where, with Klay Thompson, that may be something that you could run now where you may not necessarily do that as much with Luka and Kyrie because they handle the ball a lot more. So, maybe can he add that skill to his game? Could he add maybe some post moves? He did take a 3 in the playoffs against the Celtics. So I don't know if he's got that in his bag because it seemed like he had that in college, and in high school. So we'll see. And I'm also curious to see if he wins the starting center battle because he started at center for them early in the year. And then when Gafford first came over, he still started. Then they switched it and he became the backup center, even though he did close a lot. Obviously, it can be matchup dependent too, right? Because, Gafford can probably handle some of the bigger, more physical guys better because he's got more muscle. But, you know, I think if Lively continues to progress, you almost wonder if he should just be the starting center, especially because the numbers with him and Luca are really good in terms of, when they're out on the floor, they're way up there, right? In terms of the positive impact that he makes, which again, like if you can catch lobs and run the floor next to Luca and rebound, right, then you're set, right? Because I mean, that's kind of what Dwight Powell used to do. But, obviously, Lively is, a better player than Powell, for the most part, right? So, that's where I think you're kind of pleased about a lot of what you're seeing with him so far. It's just obviously the question is, these improvements for Dallas, will it be enough? Obviously, they had a good offseason. I think I give them an A, because I think the Clay one, obviously the gamble is age because he is an older guy. But I think he could be a change of scenery guy, and I just don't think you're going to have to rely on him quite as much as Golden State did, and I think that will be good for him. And if he can just do what he does as a shooter, that should help out Dallas, right? Because obviously in the finals, they couldn't guard Boston either, so that was a problem. But then like guys like Derek Jones Jr. just, he was unplayable kind of against the Celtics because he couldn't do anything on either end of the floor because he wasn't stopping Brown or Tatum, but he also just, didn't have any offense. So for Clay, you're giving up defense, but you are adding another offensive piece. But they still added some other defensive pieces in the offseason. And I think you should expect Derek Lively to be a bigger factor as well. So that should be able to offset some of that. So I think Dallas is still going to be really good. And I think they had a really good offseason. So like I said, A for me. So, now you can kind of get into what you think.
Yeah, I give him an A, all around. A for all around. That's what I would say
Mhm.
because I think they kind of hit on everything. You address backup point guard position, with Spencer Dinwiddie. You add in Najee Marshall, who has, we know what that guy's about. I think he's a very, I'm not gonna say dirty player, but a player that's a guy who's gonna do the dirty work per
Yeah.
se. Like he's a
And you need
scrapper.
those guys next to Luca and Kyrie.
Yes, and Quentin Grimes, you already talked about it, 3 and D, and I love that. They're leaning into that 3 and D identity, and even with a guy like Klay Thompson, I'm not too worried about him adjusting, you know, to lack of off ball movement per se. I kind of like him in a spot up role. I think that's probably gonna better suit him in his career right now. Because
Hmm.
think about it, like if Kyrie and Luca are isoing, all you need is Clay to be able to hit wide open threes because then the
Right.
defense cannot collapse. So that means more
Hmm.
one on one play for both of those guys. And when you have the best ball handler and one of the best scorers in the NBA right now, coupled with a very, very elite shooter, yeah, it's scary. And I think when nobody thought that they could improve, they somehow improved,
Yeah.
dramatically. This isn't just, a minor upgrade. I think this is one of the more underrated and underappreciated, but also greatest off seasons that we've talked about so far. So, and it all, starts with Clay because he's a difference maker.
Hmm.
What he can do offensively, he's very gifted. And another thing that's kind of cool, I doubt this will happen, but if it does happen, I think he'll fit seamlessly. He could come off the bench need be, say he is getting picked on defensively and he's just no longer, you know, able to guard anybody. He can come off the bench and that's fine. Um, I am kind of intrigued, how it's going to look in the first leg of the season,
Hmm.
but I think, once we get to All Star break and beyond, I think that's where we're probably going to see this team really succeed and really put the pedal to the metal because I think we all know that Jason Kidd is actually one of the better coaches at making adjustments. So I think we're going to see them probably game plan for Clay and getting him very involved. I think more involved probably than we've ever seen in his career, but maybe just in a little bit of a different way, like I said, because of the fact that, guys are going to be guarding Luca and Kyrie like, their life depends on it. So that's going to free up opportunities for Clay Thompson, I think. But yeah, overall, I don't think you can hate on anything that they've done this offseason. And they left a lot of room for internal development, more chemistry building as well, because a lot of the moves that they made last year, if not all of them, were, mid-season deals. And it's like,
Yeah.
deadline stuff. So give these teams time to gel. That's the scary part about these teams. Kind of goes back to what we were saying about Indiana. Give them time to gel, and I think you'll see a different look and a better look than last year, which is kind of crazy. I'm just concerned what their ceiling is going to look like. Do they go back to the finals? I don't know. I think more so probably like Western Conference Finals, if you want me to keep it
Mhm.
real. But yeah, even another thing, like you're probably expecting maybe this might be a hot take, maybe even more internal development from Luka. Can he get better? This might be
Yeah.
the best that we've ever seen him, but hey, he could get even better than last season, which would be amazing. Obviously he has room to grow defensively, but will that ever happen? Who knows? But offensively, I think he can probably take it up on one more notch, and that
Yeah.
would probably be the pinnacle. And I think Clay could be a part of that.
Exactly. And I think like last season, I think was essentially the best season of his career. I mean, he
Mm-hmm.
went to the finals and you look at his numbers, obviously. I mean, obviously, in terms of leading the league in scoring, yeah, I mean like Joel Embiid would have gotten it had he been healthy. But he still gave you 34 a game and shot 49 from the field, and also very important, 38% from three. At one point it was like 40, but the difference between
Yeah.
38 and 40 isn't too big a deal, especially again when you look at his previous seasons, right? He was like in the low 30s, right? Like as a rookie, he was like 33, then 31, 35, 35, 34, but 38 on 10 attempts a game or 10 and a half or whatever it is,
Yeah.
which is just ridiculous. I mean, that's really efficient. So I mean, when you look at it from that perspective, yeah, I mean, even if he kind of plateaus, I mean, that's still like a top 5 player easily, right? I mean, so but either way, I think the thing with Dallas is like you said with Clay. I think it's just a better fit. And again, like a lot of people, even yourself, right? Like, like last year, like, not a lot of people loved Clay Thompson's season last year,
No,
but I
I
think,
didn't.
for you also are looking at it from the perspective of like different role, change the scenery, and that
Yeah.
could be good for him.
New
And we're
year,
not
new me.
yeah, exactly. And we're not expecting him to give you 20 plus points a game
No.
like he did for the Warriors. If he can give them, like I said, somewhere around 15 a game on good shooting, that'll be good enough. And you're gonna still continue to have other good defenders on the team. If Quentin Grimes can, be in the rotation and give you, some type of boost from the guard spot, because they're gonna need that. You're gonna need at least one perimeter guy out there that I think can kind of help you out defensively. Because again, I think there's going to be a drop off, defensively with Clay instead of Derek Jones Jr. I don't know if he'll actually go to the bench because I just feel like he wouldn't have left
No, no,
Golden
no.
State and go to Dallas. But I understand, like from the perspective of, well, he's not getting paid 40 million a year anymore. So maybe there's a version where it's like, well, we don't necessarily have to play him 35 minutes a night
Yeah,
every game,
cuz
every
what I
night. Like he,
cuz what I was saying was like say he completely craps the bed. Like he cannot guard anybody. Maybe he might not even be able to really start,
right.
in term even like, shooting wise. Like say he just looks really really bad. There is a possibility that he could get his footing off the bench and that could make the team even better. That's
Mm-hmm.
kind of what I was hinting at. I don't think he's probably going to come off the bench. That's why I was like, yeah, probably won't happen, but still having him on the team gives you that possibility.
Right, exactly.
And
And
that I
that
think
and
is a
that's
testament to how deep they actually are. Like they got deeper,
exactly.
which
And
is
that's
dope.
the other thing, like you mentioned, is that they do have some depth, at a number of these spots. So they have a lot of guys that, depending on the situation, you can put out there and you can find some ways, to kind of figure some stuff out. And I think like with Dallas, I think the thing that's going to be interesting for them is the fact that like a lot of their success was on the heels of the trade deadline, right? Kind of like say the Lakers the year before, where
Mhm.
now they weren't as bad record wise as the Lakers were. So it wasn't quite as dire of straits, but they were a play-in team. The Mavs were before they made the deals, and then they got to the 5th seed because they just won and won and won. After the trade deadline. So you're kind of hoping if you're the Mavs that instead of kind of what happened with the Lakers, where you're coming off of a really good season and hoping to build, and then you kind of take a step back. I guess the record was better, but the result was not. But you're hoping if you're Dallas, you continue to build. So and the thing is that when you look at the Western Conference, right, like the Mavs, or excuse me, the Nuggets, they got worse. And that was kind of the team that was looked at as the cream of the crop in the Western Conference. Obviously, the Nuggets can still, could still make a run and make the finals. I'm not saying that that team is completely cooked and washed. It's just now the Western Conference is a little bit more wide open now. It just kind of depends on, the other teams in the Western Conference. I think it's possible for them to reach the finals, but it is kind of interesting when, I think the general consensus is that most people don't expect them to go to the finals, right? Most people didn't expect them to go to the finals in the first place last season, right? But when you look at this season, right, there's a couple other teams that I think people tend to rank above Dallas, but it is kind of interesting because technically they went to the finals, so in theory they should have more of a built-in, equity, I guess, compared to those other teams. It's just the thing is, say like when you look at Denver, they got worse, but they still went to the finals and won a title, so the core is still kind of championship proven. And then obviously with OKC, right? They made improvements and they were the 1 seed last year. But obviously, there's questions about them too, which we'll get into as we get into the offseason. Then you have Minnesota, who they played in the Western Conference Finals, but they also beat in 5. But then with Minnesota, you could also look at Edwards and if he continues to rise. So I think Dallas has a real opportunity to get back to the finals. So I think they have a better chance than some people expect. I still don't necessarily know if I'd still feel like I might be a little surprised if they got to the finals, but I think they have a really as good of a shot as any of these other teams, mainly also because of Luka, because outside of Jokic, he'd be the best guy of the other, top tier Western Conference teams. And we
Hmm.
know that at least offensively, I mean, he's a machine, right? From the perspective of a lot of those teams, had opportunities to kind of, go out there and try to slow him down. And it was tough, right? I mean, like OKC did a decent job, but then they couldn't stop the bigs, right? And then obviously with Minnesota, they couldn't stop Luka or Kyrie at all. And it seems like that might just be a matchup problem for Minnesota where it may just be tough for them to be able to slow down the Mavs. And, now they're going to have to run and chase Clay around, even though they have length and athleticism. Again, with the Mavs, I mean, again, like it's just kind of wild how we went from, it was possible and not that people said it was going to happen, but just people were thinking it just because of the fact that it didn't look like it was working. But you give credit to Dallas because, say like a team like say Atlanta, right? Like they knew that the Trae Young, you could see the Trae Young DeJounte Murray thing wasn't working, and then eventually they moved away from it. It may have been slightly later than you would have liked, but say in the case of Dallas, they didn't bail. They actually felt like, no, we actually believe in this group. We just need more reinforcements and improvements, and they did it. And then it got them to the finals. It's just a question of whether or not, they can do it again. But again, it's just the difference is compared to the other teams, they don't have as much young talent that you feel like is on the rise. Then that's the difference, right? Obviously, you have Luka, who, like you said, could be better because last year was his best season. But outside of that, obviously, it's really lively and not really any other. I mean, like Jaden Hardy, but it seems like he might just be, he is what he is,
Yeah.
right? Where he's like, seems like probably just like a scoring guard off the bench,
Yes.
right? Which is fine, but not a guy that you expect like a ton of growth from, right? So, obviously I had failed to mention they moved on from Josh Green as well, right? That was
Mm,
in the Klay Thompson deal because it was a 6-teamer, right? Where, that was
crazy.
the deal that also had like Buddy Hield and Reggie Jackson and Kyle Anderson, and all those moves that were kind of roped in there.
Most teams
Um,
ever involved in one transaction.
yeah, exactly. So, again, um, I am curious to see what happens, with with that trio of Luca, Kyrie, and Clay. Just because of the fact that it's probably not like the ideal, pairing next to those two, but it is a guy that is a proven, championship guy. Even though again, he's had some moments in the last couple of seasons that were not great. Right? Obviously, we have the play-in game, and then we have the Lakers playoff series, so that was not ideal. But again, like you said, I think it's a great point in that okay, well, it may be a little bit harder to just kind of close out on him because you can't really leave Luca and Kyrie, and sometimes you got to double those guys, and it's always kind of a tough question. When people try to figure out, should you double Luca? Should you play him 1-on-1? Because he can hurt you in both ways. Because if you
Yeah.
double him, he's a great passer, so he can just find the open man. We know about the lob threats as well. So now you add that into the mix as well, which we hadn't even talked about,
It's
right?
scary.
That was a big part of Dallas's offense last year, where they could just throw lobs up to Gafford or Lively. And now they have that plus Klay Thompson, so they could basically have like a completely, spread out floor where
Five
you
out.
might only be, yeah, exactly, where you might only be able to have 5 guys. And I think with that 5 out factor, that's why it might be more imperative for Lively to continue to improve and start because he could be an easier 5 out guy because he's got better playmaking abilities as a center
Yeah.
compared to Lively, right? You know that as a Wizards fan, right? Nobody's saying Gafford is bad. It's just obviously it's a different mix of skill sets,
Yes.
but
Yes.
still helpful for the team. But where are you at on Lively in regards to, expecting, some type of jump or some type of improvements for him? Because again, like it felt like, by the time he got to the Boston series, he had a great postseason, especially for a rookie. But then in the Boston series, that was kind of an example of, yeah, that's kind of the tough part of, you know, relying on a young guy to help you win at the highest level, because usually they're not quite able to do that. And it's not because they stink, it's just because they don't have the experience and the developed skills yet to be able to kind of get you over the hump.
Yeah, I kind of want him to. I want to see him go up to probably 12 points per game, because if we look at what he
Okay.
did last season, 8 points per game, so that's pretty solid. And I think 12 is achievable, especially if he works on his game and we can kind of see that.
Hmm.
I'm not really expecting too much from the rebounding perspective, because I feel like you've got Luca. We already know what that's about.
And the minutes wise too, like he only
Exactly.
played, well, not only, but he played 23 and a half minutes, right?
Yeah.
Double digit rebounds would be like you probably have to play closer to 30.
Yeah, but like I'd prefer Derek Lively start over Gafford, not just
Mhm.
because of, what they both can do, but also look at the frame and the size. Like Lively 7'1", 230. Like I think he can probably be a little bit more versatile than Daniel Gafford. And like you already hinted at, a jumper, that would be pretty cool. Do we think that that probably happens
Probably
gradually,
not. Yeah,
gradually, but
probably
not this season. Um,
no.
so
Yeah, can you
uh
improve from the free throw line first? I think.
yeah, that would be nice, because 50% isn't amazing.
Yeah, and it got better over the course of the postseason. To be fair, right, where like he
Yeah.
was in some high pressure situations where he needed to make free
Hmm.
throws. So
Yeah, but I mean, like I said, as long as he's able to continue to make the extra pass, make the extra swing, like you said, maybe we even see them incorporate some handoffs alongside the fact that I think he can increase his scoring just slightly. It's only like 4 points, which in theory is actually a lot. Um, I think he's capable of that, because as a rookie, that's a good starting point, for what he did. 8 points on 75% from the field. I think he can
yeah.
go up to 12 on like 70%.
And again, it's like, he's in a great situation where, you're able to get these great looks from, two great offensive players, right,
Exactly.
who are going to attract a lot of attention. And that contributes to, the 75% from the field. In addition to, like, yeah, he can get up there and catch pretty much whatever you throw up. So
And
that also helps.
defensively, he's awesome too, which is pretty cool.
Right. And that's the thing. If he can also, like I said, add maybe a little bit more strength onto his frame, that will
Sure.
help him, I think. Because, like obviously the starting groups for most teams tend to be bigger, right? Like, that's where like Philly, you're going against Embiid. Denver, you're going against Jokic, right? Obviously, Lakers, LeBron and AD. You can name whatever other team, you
Hmm.
want,
Hmm.
right? But like it's the second units that tend to be smaller, and that probably is one of the reasons why they started Gafford and then had Lively come off the bench. That way, you're not going to ask Lively to come out of the gates guarding all these giant guys,
Yeah.
but then he can kind of be, uh, an energy guy off the bench. And then of course he would tend to close a lot of these games,
Yeah.
unless he just wasn't playing well. But that's going to be, I think, a big factor for him. Again, that was a really good pick at the time, and we liked it at the
Amazing.
time. I think we had him mocked like somewhere around that range, because I know the trade happened, I think, on draft day, right? So we didn't expect that, but I think we had him mocked around where Dallas was. It was
Yeah.
because of the fact that we thought because they had a higher pick initially, because we said like they need a center, he can block shots and rim run and everything. He's basically perfect for what they want to do, because they don't have to have like a Porzingis style stretch five that
No.
goes all the way back to the 3 point line, because you already have so much offense from your other guys that you don't really need that. You need like more of a rim running lob
You
threat
need
guy
an
to kind of just
interior
balance
threat.
out. Yeah, just to kind of balance out everything, especially
Huh.
because again, like with Dallas, where they were able to kind of hurt Boston at times was when they would kind of attack the basket. But again, they're primarily a perimeter team. Even though Luka and Kyrie can get to the basket for sure, right? We know what they can do as drivers, right? But at the same time, again, Luka takes 10 threes a game and also takes some other difficult shots, right? Those turnarounds, from, everywhere on the floor.
Hmm.
So, again, it's kind of funny just how what a difference a season makes, right? Because a team like Dallas, right, that we weren't super high on, now we really like,
Yeah.
right? Whereas, there may have been some teams, like a Phoenix, right, where, we are, where we're not quite as high on them as we were a year ago. Obviously, we don't want to spoil anything, but like just in general, it's just kind of funny at what a difference a season makes. So
Yeah.
for Dallas, right, they're in a great spot because, you have a superstar, right, which is always the toughest part in terms of building a team. And then you have like a pretty good, mix of players around him, right? Do I expect them to win the title? No, but they have now gotten themselves into, that tier of teams where they have a chance to win the title,
They're in
right?
the
I think
conversation.
yeah, exactly. They're now in the conversation where they weren't necessarily prior to that, and it feels much more legitimate than it was before, right? Where it's not just like, oh, well, you have Luca, and just because you have Luca, you could probably just, get to as high as he could probably take you. Now you have like a good supporting cast around him as well. That's pretty balanced for the most part. Again, I don't expect them to be quite as good defensively as they were last season, but I still expect them to be good, and I expect them to continue to be good on offense and be more dangerous on offense because of Clay. Because because even though you're losing like some athleticism and rebounding with Derrick Jones Jr., which I didn't mention with Clay, which will be another issue, right? He's just not a rebounder guy either, which could be a problem where it's like you're guarding bigger, slower guys, but you may not necessarily be able to clear the defensive glass, so that could be a problem too. But again, that's why you have Gafford and Lively, right? And heck, Luca can get you rebounds as well. He's a big guy, and obviously he tends to average, somewhere, in that 7, 8 rebound a game mark, right?
Yeah.
I mean last season he averaged, if you want to look, I guess at his numbers, I mean, he gave you 9 rebounds a game, just over
Yeah.
9 rebounds a game, and he's averaged basically at least 8 every year except for his rookie season.
Yeah. Don't
So,
forget about PJ Washington too. You got to add him
yeah,
into the
yeah,
fold too.
exactly. Exactly. So there's a lot of guys that I think can help you out there, right? It's not really one guy that grabs all the boards,
That
right?
was my
Because like
point with Lively.
exactly. So and it's gonna have to be a team effort anyways. But
Hmm.
it seems like a lot of the guys on the Mavs have bought into the team concept, under Jason Kidd, where obviously like Luca and Kyrie are gonna do their thing, but there's not really like a ton of like weirdo possessions where what is this guy doing? Obviously, like sometimes it is, but that happens over the course of a game. But like, Washington sometimes will be aggressive, but it's still a scenario where it's like, a lot of these guys will, make the right plays, more often than not. So I really like the construction of this roster. And I think they could do a lot. Their over under is 49.5, right? And again, we've mentioned this 100 times. We don't bet. But again, it gives us a good marker for, what a lot of the insiders, and the Vegas people think this team could be. And they won 50 games last season. So basically, Vegas expects them to do about the same. So would you say over or under for the Mavs?
Easy over for me.
Yeah,
Considering
I
that
think
there's a couple of teams that are going to fall out, i.e., the Clippers, and then there's also, some other teams that will probably rise, like Memphis. I think Dallas is going to be right where they were last season, so probably around the fourth or even the third seed. I feel like the third
yeah.
seed is probably their max, but realistically, I could see them landing the fourth seed with like 52 games won or something like that.
Yeah, I think I'm with you
Because they're
where I
so much
definitely
better
think
than last year. I love it. You know?
yeah, and I'm with you where I think it's an over as well because I think Luca with a good team, if he's healthy, should get you somewhere around 50 wins
Yes.
anyways,
Yes.
right? Kind of like say like like a Jokic will get you 50 wins,
Yes.
if he's healthy. And that's the thing. Like you said, they're not. I think top 4 seed makes sense because, like you said, they're probably not going to be much higher than 3. Because I just think teams like OKC and Minnesota will win more regular season games.
Yes.
I think they might have a chance to do better in the postseason than those teams, just
Yeah.
because of the fact that you have Luca, and I think that's the difference.
Agreed.
But it's tough because generally you got to be top 3 in order to win the title. But I think they, like you said, they have the talent where it's not like last season where they did start off strong, but you knew that the roster itself wasn't necessarily that great of a roster. Now, ideally, you're going in with the roster that got you to the finals. And I don't necessarily expect like a Lakers situation where, like, yeah, the Lakers won more games than they did last season, but for a decent chunk of the season, they didn't look the part, right? That was kind of, they turned it on late. For the Mavs, I expect them to kind of go out of the gates, hot and then continue to, stay strong and win games. So, I think they can go to the finals. Again, like, I don't know, like I wouldn't necessarily quote unquote expect them to, but the Western Conference is tough because I think like with the East, I think Boston, I think is the cream of the crop. Like, would it be do they have a 100% chance of making it out of the East? No, no team does, right? Because obviously you have factors like health and things like that. But I think it's different because I think Boston is clearly the best team in the Eastern Conference, even with the other teams in the East getting better. I don't think there's a clear cut team in the Western Conference that I think is the best. I think teams like OKC and Minnesota will win the most games, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be the actual best team that will represent the Western Conference. I think Dallas could do that because of the Luka and Kyrie mix. And, if they get hot in a playoff series, they're going to be tough to stop because, they can get you over the hump with their offense. And then you have the other guys defensively that should be able to kind of, do whatever they need to do. Even though, again, compared to some of these other teams, they don't have any all NBA defensive guys, right? Like Minnesota's got, Jaden McDaniels and Rudy Gobert, right? Oklahoma City's going to have Alex Caruso, or even like a Lou Dort or, a Chet Holmgren, is obviously an awesome defensive guy, right? The
Mm-hmm.
Nuggets, right? Even though they lost KCP, they do have Aaron Gordon, right? Who's a, very good defensive player, right? The Mavs don't have that, but they do have a really good team defense where, that kind of in some ways makes up for not having like a quote unquote elite defender. But that part may kind of be their undoing just because of the fact that you're probably going to have you're probably going to need at least somebody who's on that level, come playoff time against the highest levels of competition. So it may be tough for them to win the title, but I think they have a good shot, a decent chance to make it out of the Western Conference, right? I think they're easily one of the top, 3, 4 teams in the Western Conference. And, again, like you said, conference finals, much worse than that, I feel like would be pretty disappointing if you're the Mavs, right? Like, I mean, obviously, like, there's a good chance that, like, okay, last season was like an overperformance. So now we might be setting ourselves up for, okay, they don't get back to the finals, so then it's a bad season. But it wouldn't shock me because I just think, like, again, like you went on a big run. But I still think they can build off of it. I don't expect them to win the title. But like I said, they'll be one of those teams in the mix where they should be, again, somewhere around conference finals, right? So like if that should be somewhere around the, the benchmark, right? If they can get there, then that's a good season for them. Obviously, like if you're Luka, you want to win the title, right? Because they went to the finals already. I just don't know if they're going to be able to do that if it's Boston. Because I just think Boston, as we kind of thought going into the finals, because we actually thought that the Celtics would win the finals. I just think it's a tough matchup because they just don't have, I think, the horses to be able to slow down Boston on either end of the floor. But I think, if it's not the Celtics, like if they kind of luck up and it manages to not be Boston, they could have a chance to beat one of those teams. But, if it's the Celtics, I think it almost kind of feels like you might have to take the Celtics over the rest of the field in the Western Conference until proven otherwise.
Yeah, if the Celtics go back to the finals, I think they win. Um, like that's a guarantee. But if it's somebody else from the Eastern Conference, like you said, I feel like that's where the finals is, up in the air completely. But, I think coming out of the West, they for sure have a chance. Will I say it's the highest one? Probably not. And it's kind of funny. I don't know who has the highest chance, if you want me to be honest. Because
Exactly, that's what I was talking
it's
about.
four of them. It's 4,
Mhm.
and the Mavs are definitely in that 4. It's Oklahoma City, Denver, Minnesota, and Dallas. That's
Right.
what I want to keep it with.
Yeah.
And that's the tough thing because I feel like there's a couple others in the Western Conference that you want to say like they
Yeah.
should be, in the finals
Suns,
conversation. Yeah,
yeah, like the Suns or who I guess else after the Suns, maybe.
bro,
I
I
mean,
want to
actually,
even say the Lakers just because they have Braun and AD. Like you kind of want to say, I'm not gonna say
right,
Warriors, but like yeah, I would say like Lakers and Phoenix. Like you probably
right,
would say that just because of the top end talent
yeah,
that they do
right,
have. But then, like you just look
yeah,
at the collective team unit that Oklahoma City has, Dallas now, like they're just better.
yeah, and I agree
But
with
are
that.
they better
I
than
think
Boston?
right, and
No.
that's the tough part. And like I said, that's kind of the conversation that we were having. Talking about the Western Conference, where there's
Yeah.
more good teams in the West than there are in the East.
Yeah.
But the difference is, like you said, in the East, we know who the best team in the East is. Obviously,
Yeah.
again, they could. It's always tough to go back to back. So there's no guarantees, right? Because you have to be healthy for back to back years, right? Because again, like say if you go over to the WNBA, right? The Aces are trying to three-peat. They've had a ton of injuries over the course of the season, and that's kind of sometimes what's going to happen if you're talking about 3 straight years. It's very likely one of those years is going to be a little bit tougher to do it. They could still do it, but either way, with the Celtics, that's I still think if they're healthy, that's the best team in the East. In
Yeah,
the
on
West, I'm not
paper
sure.
too. Like
Yeah,
it's
because
insane.
again, we can poke holes in those top four teams in the West because we talked about it with the Mavs. Like they're probably going to be a little worse defensively than they were last season, right? Especially because their two best guys are not particularly strong defensive players. Um, and again, I just don't think they can beat Boston necessarily. I mean, we'll see because again, like you do have added offense with Clay, but I think it'll be tough. Minnesota, right? Obviously, they have the defensive ceiling that they have, right? With that number one defense. But we saw against a team like the Mavs, right, that has elite perimeter guys. That might be a tough ask for Minnesota, right?
Hmm.
Where it's like your guards are kind of taking the bigs off the dribble, and it's like also like after Edwards, right? I don't know. Like Towns is good, but at the same time, again, he went AWOL in the Dallas series, although Edwards did too. And that's the other tough part is like they're led by the youngest guy of the mix, right? Because like even with OKC, SGA is 25, 26, or maybe a little older than that. So he's at a point in his career, even though it's not quite as proven or accomplished as some of those other guys, right? He's not 22, right? He's 26 actually. So, but with OKC, you have the other core, the rest guys in the core that are so young that even though they got a bunch of experience last year, we don't know. And then obviously with Denver, they are the only team that did it, but then they've also gotten worse each season. So you just don't necessarily know. But obviously we'll talk about those teams when we get to it. This is more of a Dallas centric one right now. But either way, I think you got to feel good about the Mavs because I just think because if they're going against these teams in the West, they have a good shot of beating any of these teams. Obviously, there are teams that they match up worse against than others. Like I think they match up well against Minnesota. Denver is interesting because we didn't see a ton of games with them post trade deadline. I think they only played one, and that was the one where Kyrie hit the game winning, sweeping hook, over Jokic or whatever. But we didn't get to see, games against them with both teams, kind of at full strength, and then with Dallas having their new and improved roster. OKC is interesting because like it feels like they have some personnel to match like guys like Luka and Kyrie, but then they didn't have the physicality to match the bigs. Now you added Hartenstein, so we'll see if that's a tougher matchup. And then after that, like again, the Clippers were the 4 seed. Like Dallas will be better than them, I think, at this point, just because I don't expect the Clippers to have as good of a season as they did last year. And then after that, like Phoenix, I think they do pretty good against, just because Phoenix defensively has no answers for Luka or Kyrie, and Dallas is can actually have a competent defense. And then the Lakers and Mavs have always had some good matchups. So who knows about that? But I just think those top four teams, you kind of have to start off the conversation in the West with them. But I think, but Dallas is in the championship mix. They've now entered the mix because
Yeah.
you had already had the player to get you in the mix, but now you have the supporting cast around him. I think to be able to put them in the mix as well. And I think
Yeah.
that's good for Dallas because again they went from a team where we didn't know what to expect from them, possibly blow it up. Right? People were even like, could Luca be moved? Down the line at some point because he's frustrated and annoyed. To now it's like unless things go really, really south, right? The vibes in Dallas should be, at an all time, well, not all time for the franchise, but like all time with Luca right now, right? Because again, I'm sure he's disappointed about losing in the finals, but you improved, like you said, when not as many people expected Dallas to make real improvements to the roster. Because the Clay thing to the Mavs wasn't even thought of as a thing until, closer to free agency. It wasn't like, the Mavs season was over and then we immediately said, who they, have a good chance of getting? Clay Thompson. We didn't expect that. So
Right.
that's better than I think you would have expected given, what could have happened. Because they could have just ran it back basically. And they
Yeah.
kind of did, but they did improve some of the other rotational pieces, and I think that should help them collectively.
Yeah, they've gotten so much better exponentially. I think, um like you said, the real ceiling for them for sure is NBA Finals, but in my opinion, I think Western Conference Finals is where they're going to end up because I just
Mm.
feel like I don't think that they can get to the finals back to back. maybe like, the following year, but I just don't, me personally, I don't see it, but it still is possible.
Yeah. I think, yeah, and again, like as we saw in the West, it's gonna be matchup based because
Yeah.
if they get because like even like in last season's playoffs, right? They had some good matchups, right? Like they played the Clippers without Kawhi, and then they played Oklahoma City, who had no experience and no real size other than Chet, and then they played Minnesota, right? Who was obviously sky high after beating Denver. But then it was like now they turn back into pumpkins against Dallas, because of some of the weaknesses with that roster. So whereas like say if Dallas plays some other team in the first round, right, it might be different. But this time around, they're not going to be a lower seed. They'll still be, they'll probably have home court in the first round, right? Because I think they'll be a top 4 seed. And that'll be nice, even though they were actually pretty good on the road until the finals, anyways, in the playoffs. So, because we know they can do that, right? Like Luka can be good anywhere. I think actually he was better on the road last postseason than he was at home.
Yeah.
But we know, like Luka, because of who he is, we know, whatever situation you need him to be in, he can get it done for you. Just maybe not necessarily against the Celtics, but we'll see if anybody can do that next
Yeah.
season.
I think he's going to win MVP.
Yeah, and that's the thing because he's been kind of a dark horse MVP guy.
Every
It's just he
year.
wasn't able to get the wins necessarily. But
This
now the
might be
team
the
is
one.
yeah, exactly. Now the team is good enough where if they stay a top 4 seed for a good chunk of the season, he could get it, right? Because obviously, like it's kind of gone back and forth between like we had Embiid win it the season before,
Hmm.
right? Obviously this year was Jokic, and then before that, right? Before Embiid it was Jokic, and then before Jokic it was Giannis, right? So because Jokic had the back to backs, Giannis had the back to backs, then we had Embiid, and then Jokic. So it's been kind of one of those 3 guys. So there may be a scenario where I'm not going to say voter fatigue necessarily because it's Embiid just got one, but there may be a scenario where Luka could get it. But who knows? Because like Embiid, if they're like a top 3 seed, unlike last season, like they might just give it to him if he plays 65 games. He's just
Yeah.
got to play 65 games, which
Yeah.
is the tough part.
Giannis, Luka, Embiid, Jokic. I feel like those are the 4 guys.
Yeah, because it was funny because like I remember my MVP pick was Tatum, and he didn't get it.
Yeah.
Because I was high on the Celtics. Like I said, I'm
Yeah, I
so mad
remember.
that I changed the pick in the postseason. But either way, and I don't think he'll get it anyways. He's not going to put up the numbers, even though his numbers are really good. He's not going to put up the numbers where everybody's like, oh, that's an MVP.
Yeah. His
Even though they're
team,
still really good. But
his surroundings are just too insane for him to, I feel like, put up
yeah,
like
and I guess
even
also
Luka
people are
monster
going to look at
numbers.
this. Yeah, and I guess it's also people are going to look at the supporting cast where it's like Jaylen Brown, Porzingis,
That's my point.
Holiday and White, compared to exactly compared to some of the other like that's how Jokic was getting it. In addition to the numbers as well, people also looked at it as like well the second best player is Jamal Murray, right? Who's really good in the playoffs, but in the regular season is like an all star guy, and then after that there's no other really all star caliber guys except Aaron Gordon's really close,
Yeah.
but then for these other teams, it's a little bit different. But yeah, I'm high on Dallas. So I think, like you said, they've improved. And I think, we're going to see them have another really good season. Like you said, it's hard to win back to back, let alone go to the finals. But, it's hard to do either one, right? Like, because again, we haven't had a team win back to back, but we haven't even had a team go to the finals back to back. Right. So, I mean, like, you got to think about that as well, right? Since the Warriors and, with Durant, right? Because after
Yeah.
that, it's either been 2 new matchups,
Yeah.
right? Or something else, right? Because obviously you had Raptors Warriors, then you had Lakers Heat, then you had Bucks Suns, right? Then you had Warriors Celtics. So for a little bit, you had 2 completely different teams. Then you went back to the Heat, but it was also the Nuggets. Then back to the Celtics with the Mavs. So there's been a new team in the finals each year, and we haven't had the same matchup, right? Like we haven't had because if Dallas, if we had the same matchup again, it'd be Celtics Mavs. I don't think that's going to be the case necessarily. Could be, but who knows? Because again, like I think Dallas, like you said, the ceiling is the finals. It's just it may be tough to go back to the finals because it's just very difficult, especially in the West where every team is good. It's not like there's a team that's head and shoulders above everybody, or if there is, they have to prove it. Whereas we know in the East, it's Boston.
Yeah.
So now, in terms of like news, rumors, and again, let us know your thoughts on the Dallas Mavericks in the comments, right? How high are you on the Mavs? How much do you believe in their chances of either going to the finals or, maybe winning the title? Let us know. But going back to some, news and rumors around the NBA, we got one earlier today, which was kind of surprising. I know he didn't play a whole lot this season, but according to Shams Charania, AJ Griffin, right, who was on the Hawks and was traded to the Rockets, might retire, right? Apparently he's quote unquote seriously considering stepping away from basketball. So this was one that I was not expecting at all because, I hadn't really followed him a ton since his rookie season because he hadn't done much. But he basically mentioned that both sides are preparing for his departure from the game. So he might just retire. They hadn't really, cited what the reasoning is. So maybe there's some personal stuff, who knows? Obviously, we're not, going to pry or anything like that because that's not what we're here to do. But, obviously for the Rockets, right, that's, kind of rough because obviously you acquired him. Didn't have a great season last year anyway, so who knows? I mean, he was a good rookie, but if he is going to retire, right, that's, unfortunate, right? But hopefully, whatever is going on, right, hopefully everything's okay. And if he does retire, hopefully, post career, he'll be fine.
Yeah, I don't even know what to really say. Former 16th pick. And yeah, his rookie season was really, really freaking good. But yeah, I don't know what happened, and I'm hoping and wishing
Yeah,
the best for him because I don't know. It
yeah,
sounds like it's pretty
and
serious.
right, and maybe whatever happened might have tied into what happened his second season. Who knows? I like I said, I'm not sure because they didn't put any of that out there, and they don't necessarily need to. That probably won't come out until after he retires. If assuming that happens, right? This has all
Yeah,
been reported, but we'll see. But hopefully, again, everything is relatively okay.
yeah.
Um, and now, according to the Athletic, the it says the Warriors are unlikely to give Jonathan Kuminga a max contract offer, right? So just kind of interesting. So because we had heard that Kuminga wants one, but I don't know if he'll get one. According to the
No.
Athletics, Anthony Slater, they're not prepared to offer him the full 5-year max, and there hasn't been significant progress towards a deal. He said, "quote That doesn't mean there isn't a reasonable-ish middle ground, perhaps in the 30-ish million per season range as the deadline nears. Nobody can say for sure what will happen if Kuminga's presented a concrete, life-changing financial offer, and the Warriors come to believe the deal will age well enough as the salary cap projects to skyrocket. There have been tentative extension discussions between the sides, the league sources said, but a clear divide remains." So, end quote. So, obviously, a lot going on here. And we talked about it, right? Where, he had a good season, right? He seems like a good player. But in this new environment with the new CBA, is he worth giving, the full max to, right? 40 whatever million it is a year, because I guess, they said middle ground is in the 30-ish million range. So that's the middle ground. So the max is like 40, I think, or 45, something like that. But either way, it's rough, right? Because if you're going to give him the full max, I mean, you got to be, I think, essentially like a for sure all-star plus, level guy, right? Like if you're gonna get that much, right? Like that's the kind of the issue going on right now with a guy like a Brandon Ingram, where really good player, right? But he makes a lot of money. And if you can't visualize a scenario where he's like your second best player on, a really, really good team, then a lot of teams probably aren't necessarily going to be up for that. And, with Kaminga, obviously it's a different case because he's not as good as Brandon Ingram. Even though he's, a good player, he's not as proven yet. Again, he had a good season, 16 points, 5 rebounds a game, 53 from the field. Um, but I don't know. It's just kind of a weird scenario, right? Because it's like, apparently they didn't want to give up Kaminga in these deals, but then now they also don't necessarily want to give him a max. But, they have until I think the beginning of the season to possibly agree on an extension. Otherwise, they'll go into the season without one, and then he'll be, I think, a restricted free agent in the offseason. So I don't know. I think we both kind of talked about we're probably not expecting something before the season starts, right? That it probably just kind of festers through the season. And, what does that look like? Because we already had a scenario last season where, he had, gone to the press and said, I can't succeed under the Steve Kerr, right? Obviously, it seems like they've kind of patched things up, but if you're not going in there with an extension, then I don't necessarily know, what the vibes are like right now. Because obviously with the Warriors, you're in a transitional spot anyways. And again, they were a team that was very comfortable paying, the highest salary in all of the world, basically. But
Yeah.
now, obviously, it's a different point at this point because now it's a lot more punitive if you do that. And I just don't necessarily know if you're going to be super excited about, are we okay with paying Jonathan Kuminga 40 plus million a year? Because
No.
again, he's good and he's improving. And his ceiling could be very, very high, but we don't know what his ceiling is yet. And do we know for sure, like, could he be the second best player on a really good team? I don't know.
No. My question is like, what has he done so far to warrant a max extension? Nothing much, really, if you want me to be honest. And I'm not saying he's a
Right.
bad player. It's just
No.
I'd be walking with on the line of caution, just like Golden State is. Of course, he wants a max extension, and of course, they're
Yeah.
not going to give it to him because he hasn't
We
done
want
anything to freaking showcase that he deserves it. Like, what are we
we want
talking
Max.
about? Exactly.
Yeah,
Who
we want.
wouldn't want a max extension? Does that mean they're going to
Yeah.
give it to anybody? No, no.
No.
So that would be
Yeah.
my question, and like, I can't wait till we get to the Warriors because, oh my God, my grade is going to be so funny. I can't wait.
Yeah, but again, it's just kind of a weird situation because again, I think like I said, I agree with you where I'm like I think it's definitely the right thing to not necessarily just completely jump into like like I'm super excited to pay Jonathan Kuminga 40 plus million a year, right? Because again, a couple seasons ago they paid Jordan Poole basically 30 million a year, and then look how that turned out. They got rid of him
Yeah.
for a guy who's old enough to be like his much older brother. And
Yeah.
then,
Yeah.
and then, and then they got rid of that guy. So, I mean, and obviously like Kaminga, like, yeah, he's good, but, at least with Poole, at least like he kind of, obviously it has not ended up looking like a good contract now, but it came off of a really good year where he was one of the best players on a championship team.
Bro, they don't win the
Kaminga,
title without him. You can win the
right.
title without Kaminga.
Whereas Kaminga, right, was one of the best players on a team that missed the playoffs. Like they did win 46 games, so I know there's a lot of people that are saying like it is a good team, and I'm not saying it's a bad team at all.
It was a
I'm
bad
just saying,
team.
you know what I mean, like from the
I know.
perspective of yeah, because in the West, like winning 46 in the West may not be the same as winning 46 in the East,
Agreed.
but
I still think
but
they
either
suck, bro.
right, but either way, like the thing is that like yeah, he's not done enough, I think, to say like, oh yeah, we're for sure gonna give him, otherwise they would have already done it probably, right? Obviously, I mean, like I guess it's different now because of the new CBA, but I think it's clear that like there's kind of some type of middle ground that's probably gonna, and that's kind of what Anthony Slater was hinting at, or basically saying is that again, Kaminga wants the max, like you said, who doesn't want the max? But obviously the Warriors don't want to give it to him, right? You're not going to have that issue, say, with like, like a Franz Wagner, right? Because like, again,
No.
even though like he got paid a lot for sure, right? And he didn't have the best game 7 at all. It was actually really horrible. But he's more proven at this point, than a Kaminga, right? And those guys were drafted in similar spots. Actually, Kaminga was taken before Wagner, right? So
Yeah.
I mean,
Yep.
yeah, and those guys have been kind of compared because there are people that are kind of now in hindsight saying like maybe the Warriors should have taken Wagner, because
Yeah.
Kaminga maybe his ceiling could be high, but we don't know, right? Because I need to see more, I think for sure, before I would completely be excited about giving him that money. But either way, like I said, I guess the main question is he actually going to be a part of this team, in the future? Because I think the thing is for the Warriors, I don't necessarily, at least right now, see like an obvious path or move to getting to a title, right? So if that's the case, then he's going to be on the team, right? The only way he gets moved is if it's like there's an all NBA guy that's out there, at the deadline or something like that. And in order to get him, we have to give up Kaminga, right? Like, say, fictitious scenario, the Bucks suck, and everybody's like, all right, we got to move Middleton or Lillard, and then Giannis is like, you know what, I'm out of here, right? Maybe something like that. And that's my point when I'm saying like, when I say there's no obvious path, that's the scenario where I could see them doing it. But if it's like somebody that's, like they didn't clearly want to do it for like Ingram or sounded like they didn't want to even do it for Paul George or Markkinen. So if that's the case, I get that because again, he's good, so you shouldn't just give him up for nothing. It's just the question is, if you don't do that, then you're in a scenario where you may have to pay him a ton of money, right? And once you do that, then the flexibility that you had is kind of gone because then you're just going because then you're back to paying a bunch of guys a lot of money.
Yep, I'm telling you, they're cooked, bro. They're literally cooked until Steph retires. Like,
Yeah,
that's just keeping it a
and that's
buck.
the tough part. And like you said, we'll go into the Warriors more, once we get to that team. But it is kind of an interesting conundrum because they have, and that's kind of why clearly Pajemski is valued so highly because it's like that's a good player on a reasonable contract. We talked about it with the Lakers, right? Where obviously he's not on a rookie deal anymore; he's on a regular contract, but his contract is really good, right? You're talking about like a good starter that's not making a ton of money. Those are very valuable players to have, right? The moment that Kuminga starts making 40 plus million a year, that's when it starts to probably become a little bit more negative. Of course, the cap will go up each year, so it won't look as ridiculous. Like say like Jaylen Brown, right? Making, 60 or whatever million it is at the end, just won a title, won finals MVP, right? And then by the time we get 5 years down the road, there'll be guys making like 400 million or whatever, right? A guy will make like 80 million in a season. So we'll see. But I think Kaminga needs to continue to improve, right? Like, and we know, like, as an outside shooter, he's improved as a defender, but he could always be better. Decision making has improved. And again, he's good, right? Like, I'm not saying he's not good because I know, like, I wasn't as high on him initially. And I've changed my tune on him over time, but I still don't necessarily know if I'm like, I don't know if I want this guy as, one of my 2 or 3 best players on a good team. Like I feel like I feel like if he's one of your two or three best players, it's probably not that great a team.
You're
Even if he
cooked.
gets to his, even if he gets to his ceiling, I think because I don't know. Like and again, not saying he's bad at all. I just feel like I don't see a scenario where he's one of the best players on a title team.
Nope, not
Which
at
again,
all.
that's a very tall task anyway. So even if he doesn't get there, that still could be a really really good player. By the way.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's pretty much it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, let us know your thoughts on the Mavs and their offseason, what your expectations are for, them and their players and the team and the success level. Let us know because we liked reading that comment about, the Indiana Pacers, from our last video. And check that out if you haven't already done so. Again, we're going through the offseason. We've already been through the entire Eastern Conference. We just started our first team in the West, so we're going to continue to do the West, right? Because these are going to kind of go close to the beginning of the season as we do these episodes, twice a week. And again, like, the season is on its way, right? Because training camp is going to be coming up. And then obviously preseason after that. So, obviously expect more and more stuff from us, as things continue to, get closer to the beginning of the season. Continue to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already done so, right? Continue to share these videos, right? We've seen, people coming in from other external places outside of just YouTube. So that's always good to see. So we appreciate all the support and we'll see you next episode.